Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today is our 10th meeting on Islamic 101, and it's the last session, inshallah. So for this series, we'll start a new series, inshallah. So the topic of today's is Islamic Sharia, and it is a very controversial topic here in the United States among particularly the conservatives, because they don't know what is Sharia. They don't know that the American law is all Sharia law. You could go to, in Harvard, they are putting that the main sources of American law is and they put the names of all the main legislators for American law, and they put the name of Prophet Musa, Prophet Isa, and Prophet Muhammad. And the name of Prophet Muhammad is in the Supreme Court. If you go to the Supreme Court here in Washington, D.C., they put that Prophet Muhammad is one of the main legislators for the American law. The founders of the American Republic were fond of the Quran. I mean, you hear about the Quran of Thomas Jefferson. He read extensively the Quran, and you know Jefferson is the father of the American Constitution. So there was a huge influence of Sharia, Islamic law. Sharia is in English, in Arabic means Islamic law. And there is some few intricacies I'm going to explain it. So these are the topics we covered for the last few months, and this is the last topic we're going to cover, Islamic jurisprudence. And these are some references I recommend. Every Muslim house should have Fiqh al-Sunnah by Sayyid Sabiq. And the strength of this treatise, it is a very simplified book on Islamic law. However, Sayyid Sabiq took upon himself in the 1950s, almost 70 years ago, he found that most people don't understand Islamic law, the common man. So he wanted to make it easy. So he went to what the majority of the scholars said about what every Muslim should know. So there is knowledge that every Muslim should know, and there are knowledge that only the scholars know. Not every person need to know. So he basically wrote that book for the common man. And as you know, the common man was always detached from the scholars. They could not understand the language of the scholars. So in the 20th century, our scholars, they did a huge effort. Among them are Sayyid Sabiq, Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and others. Books of hadith are all classified according to Islamic law. You find hadith classified as about prayers, hadith about purity, hadith about Hajj, and so on. So the books of hadith are very good source of Islamic law. You can get a concise book of hadith or get Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. There are 6 main books of hadith. There is a very small booklet for children and also for Muslims about the day and the night actions of the Prophet ﷺ. It's called Dear Beloved Son by Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, the scholar of the 5th century of Islam. And then, of course, there's Gardens of the Righteous. It's a summary of ahadith. There is Bulugh al-Maram. This, if you want to get more specialized into more detailed books about fiqh. The Foundations of Sunnah by Ahmed Muhammad. These are specialized books. And then on green, I'm showing you one of the very rare books in the fiqh, in the Islamic Sharia, addressing politics. The first one is Theory of the Higher Objective and Intents of Islamic Law by Imam al-Shatibi. Imam al-Shatibi is among the very few people, and there is a political reason why the scholars avoided talking about politics. And then the Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun. It's an introduction to Islamic history. Ibn Khaldun, he was the first sociologist in the history of humanity. As Western sociologists mentioned that the first book on sociology was written by Ibn Khaldun. He explained, because he was at the time where the Islamic civilization was suffering, being attacked and getting weak. So he wanted to analyze the reasons for this kind of weakness. And if you read some of the writings about him, he describes really the phenomena that's happening in the Muslim world today. Say how before decadence lead to superstition, people believing in soothsayers and want to think about the end of time. Like he lived at a time where people think it's the end of time. Like many of our common people today say, oh, this is the time of the Mahdi, you are waiting for the Mahdi. It's all just to numb the feelings of the masses. And then the last 4 books are all contemporary books. The Sunnah, A Source of Civilization by Dr. Al-Qaradawi. A Day with the Prophet, Ahmed von Denver, he's an American convert. The Lawful and Prohibited, this is an important book to have. The Lawful and the Prohibited in Islam by Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and Social Justice in Islam by Sayyid Qutb. Again, that's a political book. Many of our Muslim scholars now are starting to write about politics. And that's why you find the despotics, the enemies of Islam, describing this kind of writing political Islam. They don't want Muslims to talk about politics. Like at the time of decadence, people did not want the scholars to address the issues of politics. All dictators are always want to monopolize power. So I want to address some definitions. Then I'll talk about the sources of the Sharia law, the stages, how Islamic jurisprudence developed, branches of Islamic law. And I want to give you a touch of everything. I'm not an expert, and I don't expect any of us to become an expert. Some people spend their lives to study this. So Islamic knowledge is so broad that if you study the Quran, people specialize in the Quran. The Quran has its own sciences, and I addressed this when I talked about the Quran. There are sciences of the Quran. There are sciences of fiqh. And some people specialize in the Arabic language because everything in Islam refers to is in Arabic. So you have to really to comprehend the Arabic. You cannot be a scholar of Islam without really being very deep in Arabic language. And I was telling Sumaya today in the morning that it is very sad that many of our children, second generation, are not really versed in the Arabic language because it is so deep that people who go to the Arabic language in Al-Azhar or in Dar al-Ulum in Egypt, which are the top Arabic courses in the world, they have to memorize the poetry before Islam because this is where the source of Arabic came and the meaning of every single word. If Arabic is not your native language, it's extremely difficult. It's not impossible, but it's extremely difficult. And you'll find most of the people who are very strong in the Arabic language, they don't learn any other language because they don't want to tamper with the knowledge of Arabic. I have seen that among many scholars. We'll talk about branches of Islamic law, influence of Islam on modern law, aspects of Islamic law, and schools of fiqh. So touch about every one of those topics. Definitions. Sharia means, in Arabic, Sharia means a way. From it comes shara. Shara means street. But in the context of Islamic jurisprudence means the law of Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the law of God. So this is what it means. But the true root word means, Sharia means a way. But when we say Sharia, it's the way of law. That's what all scholars agree on. Fiqh is different than Sharia. Fiqh is Islamic jurisprudence. Islamic jurisprudence is different than Sharia. What difference is that? Jurisprudence means the understanding, our understanding of Sharia. Not us as common people, but our scholars. So the scholars have an understanding, and that understanding may be right or wrong. They are not prophets. They are not messengers of Allah. They are prone to do mistakes. So it's a great accomplishment by our scholars that they made a difference between the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their own understanding. So nobody has had the arrogance to say that their interpretation is the only interpretation of the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the beauty of Islam is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not mention the details of everything to leave room for the variations through different civilizations, different cultures. This is why came the different schools of understanding and fiqh. The foundation of fiqh is a knowledge by itself. There are some people who specialize in fiqh, means jurisprudence, and some people specialize in usul al-fiqh. There is an entire school in Al-Azhar called Foundations of Fiqh, and it's a different kind of science. Okay, next. So this is slide just explained to you the difference between Sharia and Islamic jurisprudence, which is fiqh. Sharia is absolute because it is the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But fiqh is evolving from, and unfortunately, many of the common people, not the scholars, the common people are so rigid. They say, oh, Abu Hanifa said that, or Imam Shafi'i said that. They don't understand. Modern scholars may not say the same thing. They can be Hanafi or they can be Shafi'i, but will not say that because the circumstances have changed. Imam Shafi'i himself, he had a certain fiqh when he was in Iraq, but when he moved to and within the same generation, I mean, there was no difference in ages or different century. He changed his opinion. He found the situation in Egypt was very different than the situation in Iraq. So you find Imam Shafi'i has two schools of opinion, one for the people of Iraq and one for the people of Egypt. And one important rule by our scholars is that they say always, my ruling is correct with a possibility of error. And others' opinion are wrong with a possibility of correctness. So they never got this, my opinion. What I'm saying is Islam, if you don't do this, you're a kafir, or you are such and such, or you don't understand Islam. No decent scholar would say that. And you find somebody who is very strong about an opinion where there is difference of opinion among the scholars, you know he's not a scholar. This is something very important to understand. That scholars do not quarrel over things where there is a difference of opinion. Sources of Sharia, the Quran, the Hadith, which is the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ and his deeds and his reported actions, and scholarly endeavor. And scholarly endeavor is going to always to those two sources. And there is many times people do not understand the Hadith or the Quran, and only scholars can explain it to. And this is where human endeavor comes. The examples from the Quran addressing issues of Sharia, I'll let you read it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us what's prohibited, and this is one of the commandments that's in Surah. I don't remember which surah it is. Surah Al-An'am. It's surah number 5. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Arabs, don't take partners with Allah, to be kind to parents, not to kill your children. And the Arabs had that very bad culture of killing girls, baby girls. So the Quran is just chastising them, telling them this is haram. Never do this.
So is this categorized as Sharia?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Don't kill. Do not approach just things that ugly or kill people. So another example of laws of the Quran: do not approach the wealth of the orphans until they reach the age of full strength, and be just when you measure things, and how many cheating is happening in the markets today. And cheating, not in only physical things. People try to sell you services and they don't give you the services. This is cheating. This is cheating. So the Quran says us not to cheat. وَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ وَالْمِيزَانَ بِالْقِسْطِ, and give measure and weight with full justice. And no burden do we place on any soul. لا نكلف نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful to us. When you weigh things, sometimes you are measuring, for example, half a pound. If it's different by few percentage, you know it's impossible. And there is no physical measure that can give you that accuracy unless you have a balance that maybe costs you $10,000, a scientific thing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just, there are some leeway there. And this is where the measures and the standard organizations come and just establish. They have to calibrate your gas pump. Yeah, they have to calibrate the weight in the grocery store within limits. Okay, so some people become so paranoid, they are afraid that it's different and so on. So Allah says, "La nukallifu nafsan illa wus'aha." This is out of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No burden do we place on any soul. And this verse, a similar verse. That's a verse in I think a similar verse, not this one, is in Harvard. Very similar. This is in Surah Al-Ma'idah, or Surah Al. I don't remember it. Yeah, this is Surah Al-Ma'idah. Yeah, verse, chapter number 5. And an important guidance for Sharia, وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا. Verily, this is my way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking here. Leading straight, follow it. Follow not other paths that will scatter you from the great path of Allah. Shaitan misleads the believer by trying to deviate them. And when you deviate a little bit, and then the next deviation, you're completely out of the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaitan will not tell you to go out of the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaitan will try to deviate you a little bit, doing a little bit infraction, another small infraction, then you find yourself completely out. So this is an advice for the believers. This is an example from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet says Islam is built on 5 pillars: testify that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger, performing the prayers, paying the zakah, making the pilgrimage to the house, and fasting Ramadan. Okay. So that's another example. And now let's talk about human endeavor. This is where really you'll find where there came different schools of thought. Human endeavor appears in our understanding of the Quran. For example, a very simple example, the ayah describing how to make wudu. There is 2 readings where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. And there is a reading, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلِكُمْ, a vowel, a difference in vowel. These are 2 readings that are acceptable. So one reading will lead you to one conclusion, one reading will lead you to another conclusion. So for the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, take وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ. Shia say وَأَرْجُلِكُمْ. And people accepted this from them because it's one of the readings. So the Shia, for example, they don't wash their feet. They wipe. And you know we can wipe if you have socks. But the Shia wipe even without socks. But it's one reading of the Quran, which is an acceptable reading for them. But it's not acceptable among Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. There are other examples of this, but for this is where human endeavor would come in. The same thing, understanding the hadith of the Prophet. Some people understand the hadith in a certain context, some people understand in a different context. So it gives you different understanding. The Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet themselves, they differed over certain issues. And an example of it is the beard. Abdullah ibn Abbas used to shorten his beard. Other Sahaba used to lengthen their beards. So Abdullah ibn Abbas, that's one way. Other Sahaba was another way, about the length of the beard. And then comes human precedence. Historical precedence. So the unanimous agreement of the scholars is a historic precedence. Example, the unanimous agreement of the scholars is the way we pray, we make wudu. This is all came unanimous. There is no difference in it. The way we fast, the way you perform Hajj, this is unanimous. Came narrated by so many hadiths, by so many companions of the Prophet. So that's called ijma'. There are some situations came later on after the generation of the companions, and all the scholars also agreed on certain things. So it becomes ijma', means unanimous agreement by the scholars. There are some schools of thought that don't accept unanimous agreement of the scholars because this is an impossible task after Islam spread all over the world. They say the Muslims spread into Central Asia, into India, into North Africa. How could you have a unanimous agreement between the scholars in India and the scholars in North Africa, where it takes months to travel? So that's why some schools don't accept. But those who agreed that the majority of the scholars, basically at the heart of Islam, in Syria, Egypt, and Arabia, they consider that the unanimous agreement. And then there's something called analogy. Analogy is that something that's not mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah, but understanding the reason it was made haram would extend it to something else. And the simple example of this is alcohol. Alcohol, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that is banned because you lose your mind. So scholars have said, according to qiyas, drugs, any kind of drug that takes your mind, it's haram. It's not permissible. So this came from qiyas. And you find some stupid common people in our time, they tell you, drugs are not mentioned, hashish is not mentioned, hashish is okay. Because it's not mentioned in the Quran. But the scholars unanimously have taken the position that hashish, drugs, anything that intoxicates you is haram. General welfare, istihsan. Something that's not mentioned in the books of hadith or in the Quran, but it's for the benefit of people. So it's a general rule for all the rest is that everything is halal, everything is allowed. If it is not mentioned, it is haram. So the scholars are very careful to make something haram, and everything is allowed, unless they found a reason that's very similar, like qiyas, that makes it haram. And then comes culture. In Islam, the culture of people is part of fiqh. It comes at a lower priority, but you do not go and break the culture of people. You respect their culture. If it is not in contradiction with Islam, if it is in contradiction, definitely need to educate them. Then they should stop this culture. And then the last thing is the laws of the people of the book. So if something we learn from the people of the book, and it is a very low priority because basically you have to understand these in the context of the Quran and the Hadith. So basically you have to be careful. And there is also some schools that say the action of a Sahabi, of one of the companions, is considered acceptable, and it's part of the Sharia. So Sharia addresses faith and spiritual issues, tell us about the unseen, al-ghayb, Allah's order to us, how to worship, and how to conduct ourselves. So in worldly matters, there are two branches of Sharia, how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how to conduct ourselves with each other. As I mentioned, I'm not an expert in this. I'm just summarizing what I've read from scholars and learned from scholars. So basically, this is a very common knowledge, and everybody should educate himself about it. The purpose of Sharia, this is very important and helps you put priorities in your life. First thing, protecting your faith. So you would lose your life to protect your faith. Safeguard of the mind and soul and sound judgment. These intoxicants or anything else can affect your mind. Can be brainwashing, or just imagine in our time they can brainwash you. The media can destroy your mind. So you have to be careful what enters what you see, what you hear. Brother Wael, he talked to us so many times about the songs that our kids are learning. They are teaching them immorality. And we, as particularly immigrants, our English is not very proficient. We don't understand these songs. I cannot understand an American song, period. I mean, if I hear the music, but I cannot understand anything about this, particular rap music and all of this junk. But they are affecting the minds of the young people. Protecting your honor, your family, your spouse, protecting life. So this comes lower priority. It means that you would sacrifice your life for protecting your faith, your mind, and your honor. Last thing is your wealth. So you can lose your wealth for the sake of the other priorities. So these are the priorities of the Sharia. Stages of Islamic law. There was the prophetic time where Prophet ﷺ was the interpreter of the Quran and who was the source of legislation, matters not addressed in the Quran. And then came the period of the companions, which extended during the first century. First, the first righteously guided Khalifa from 11 to 40 after Hijrah. And then came the time of the knowledgeable companions. After that period, the main scholars were Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and Abdullah ibn Umar. Abdullah ibn Abbas was in Mecca. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was in Kufa, and Abdullah ibn Umar was in Medina. So they were the three pillars of understanding of the Islamic fiqh, and all the scholars learned from them. Many other companions, but these were the main foundations or the main figures that carried on the fiqh. And two schools developed during the first century, the school in Medina and the school of Kufa. Kufa is in Iraq. And then came the period, which is the second century and part of the third century, where you hear about Abu Hanifa, Malik ibn Anas, not Anas ibn Malik, Malik ibn Anas, Imam Malik. Reverse the name. Okay. Anas ibn Malik is the companion of the Prophet ﷺ. So who was the last person? That's why this period of the companions ended in 93. That's where the last companion of the Prophet died. And he was Anas ibn Malik. So that's the period of the companions. He was the last companion to leave this life. Then came the second period, which is the period of the followers. And then came the period of the followers of the followers. These are the three generations that are highly regarded in Islamic history and Islamic fiqh. And then came the period of the great Imams. They were the followers of the followers. They were not, some of them were followers, some of them were followers of the followers. So Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Shafi, Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And then almost 600 years later, there were great scholars until 600. Actually, this is around 600. In later dates, I use the Common Era, and early dates, I keep always the Islamic era because it relates you to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So this was really the end of the great Imams. There were great scholars after that, and particularly encyclopedic scholars who gathered a lot of knowledge. And then came a period of stagnation. And what does this coincide with? That period of stagnation until the 19th century. Any clue? What is it? No. No, it's not Ottoman days. This is when Baghdad was sacked by the Mongols. Or the Islamic knowledge was destroyed. All the libraries in Baghdad. Baghdad was the biggest city in the world, the center of civilization from east and west. And when it's sacked by the Mongols, a lot of Islamic knowledge was lost. And then in modern times, started with the 19th century, there were a lot of new scholars who tried really to revive. And what steered that revival is colonialism. Colonialism, basically the Muslims came into touch, like the Crusaders were the awakening for the West, colonialism was awakening for the Muslims. So, عسى أن تكرهوا شيئا هو خير لك. Sometimes you hate something, but indeed, colonialism woke up the Muslims all over the world. Okay. And among the modern scholars, Muhammad Rashid Rida, Muhammad Abdu, Hassan al-Banna. Hassan al-Banna is one of the main activists that started really awakening Muslims, not on the intellectual level, but on the action levels. Branches of Islamic law. I don't want to take too much time. Just what time is it? It's 6 o'clock, so I'll try to finish in a few minutes. There is the ritual law, as I mentioned, related to worship, ablution, purification, prayers, fasting, zakah, and pilgrimage. And then there is the human social relations, economic dealings, foods and drinks, legal proceedings, marriage, divorce, inheritance, oath and promises, and contracts, crimes and punishment, international law, and war and jihad. So Sharia addresses every aspect of our lives. That's why some people say Islam is not a religion in the Western context, in the Western understanding. Islam is a way of life. It's a complete ideology. And this is what makes many people in the West don't like Islam. It's a complete way of life. And it gave us the basis of modern law, but basically the banning of alcohol, intoxicants, banning of gambling, fake contracts, which our modern society is full of this kind of things, the banning of pornography and the encouraging of marriage and all of this. These are things the West doesn't like. There are aspects of Western economy. You're talking in the trillions of dollars. In an Islamic economy, it will not exist, period. It will not exist, period. It will not be allowed to exist. These are some outlines of Islamic jurisprudence. Basically, Islamic law guarantees dignity and equality to all human beings, freedom of every member of the society within the tenets of Islam, no compulsion in religion. This is a very important principle. لا إكراه في الدين. It's a main principle in the Quran. You cannot force people to change their religion. So all minorities in the under Islamic law are protected. Even those who are really have strange things. So Muslims when they went to India, they tolerated the old Hindu religions and Buddhists and so on. Muslims when they went to Egypt and Syria and the Levant, they did not interfere with the Jewish or with the Christian culture. And the Ottomans in particular, they were very lenient. They were very lenient with the non-Muslims. And actually the majority of the subjects or citizens in the Ottoman Empire were non-Muslims. The majority were non-Muslims. So the rights of minorities are protected. Minorities cannot interfere with their personal laws, their dietary law, or anything. Christians were allowed to drink in the whole Middle East. Some people think that you should ban them, should go pursue. No, you don't pursue them. You can't. During Islamic law, you could not publicly trade with intoxicants. But if people use it in their homes or they produce it in their home, you cannot interfere with it. You cannot spy on people. The dignity of each individual is sacred in Islam. And I mentioned before the story of Umar al-Khattab, who discovered young people in a house in Medina. They were drinking. And he knew about it by just climbing over a fence. And they told him, you cannot do that. You are entering into private property. It's like in the US here, for example, if the police get evidence in an illegal way, the judge will throw the case out. So you obtained the evidence in an illegal way. You either spied on somebody's phone or you entered their home without a warrant or anything like this. Same thing, Omar could not prosecute them. But he got a promise from them to reform themselves. Though. He told them, okay, I'm not going to do anything, but promise me you're not going to do this, and they gave him some kind of promise. In Islamic law, every individual is innocent until proven guilty. And it's important that Islamic law cannot be applied unless in an Islamic society. Although many of the principles, but Islamic law is comprehensive in its totality. It's very hard to apply it piecemeals. And there will be some, like some people in our time, they say, we want to start applying the punishment law. And this is a crooked understanding of Islam. How can you apply the punishments when the whole society is not Islamic? And I'm talking about Muslim countries. The whole society is not Islamic. And under the effect of colonialism, people became so westernized and vices everywhere. And then you want to start applying the penal law, cutting the hands, and so this was kind of reversing the priority in among some of the Islamic movements. And Islamic law is to be implemented gradually because this is how the Prophet did. The Prophet, the Quran did not ban alcohol all of a sudden. It took 3 stages. And everything else should be taken in consideration. At the time of Umar, there was a drought. And people could not find food. Umar al-Khattab said, I'm not going to apply the punishment of theft. If a hungry person goes and steals food, I'm not going to prosecute him. And people tell, this is against the Sharia. Sharia says you have to cut the hand of the thief. And he said, no. This is how he understood the essence and the spirit of the Islamic Sharia. Now I want to talk about how Islamic Sharia has influenced modern society. equality of human beings, and the gradual destruction of slavery. The amazing thing is that Islam came and said nobody can be enslaved anymore. In the Roman law and the previous law, if somebody cannot pay his debt, he's enslaved. They take him as a slave. Or even some members of the family, the whole family can be enslaved if they cannot pay their debt. Islam banned this. You cannot kidnap people and sell them as slaves. The only source of slavery became, after Islam established itself, is that through wars, because some Muslim tribes would lose their members to the enemy, so Muslims used to keep their captives and exchange them with the slaves of the enemy. So that led to the gradual destruction of slavery. 80% of human beings, I always mention this, before Islam were slaves, whether in the East, in China, in India, or in Europe. Islam destroyed that. Slaves became a minority. And Islam treated them like a slave was treated as a member of the family. And that's why the word mawla came. So slavery under Islam is completely... Get out what you have in your mind about slavery in the West. It was not like this. It was completely different. And many of the slaves became scholars, not only free people. No, they became scholars. Like Imam Ibn Sirin, Al-Hasan al-Basri, their parents were slaves, and they were emancipated in the Islamic society. And they became scholars. Many rulers came from slavery background. So you remember of Kafur, for example. Al-Mamalik, who ruled for centuries. They were all slaves, and they became rulers. Islam destroyed theocracy. I don't need no superstition or any kind of things not mentioned in the Quran. No clergy or intermediaries. No compulsion in religion. Economic fairness. This is a very important thing, and it's a political issue, and nobody emphasized it in our time. Economic fairness. If the entire world paid their zakah, and modern economists say that if banks would impose a 1% or 2% on all assets, there will be no poverty in the world. There will be no poverty in the world. So the entire world GDP is around $150 trillion. So 2% of this would be, or 2.5% would be around $3 to $4 trillion. If you collect all the aids America sends to the entire world, or all the Gulf states who claim to be generous and so on, it won't be more than a few $100 billion. It's less than 10% of what Islamic zakah would impose. So in Islamic society, people pay zakat, there will be no poverty. And the Prophet ﷺ, there will be, if there is poverty in a society, know that the rich people are not fulfilling their duties. Islam accepts differences between people, but does not accept poverty. And our scholars tell us that if any person comes and tells you accept poverty because it's a way of life, tell him that he's a fake scholar. No scholar should ever stand and tell you accept your fate. You are poor because that's your fate. That's your destiny. Say, this person, just boycott this person. This person is not a scholar. He's a crook. Modern human rights have definitely been influenced by Islamic laws, equality of human beings, and the dignity of every human being. Many international treaties right now are based on Islamic laws. And the Islamic war ethics were the basis of the Hague's and the end of the 19th century and the Geneva Convention in the 20th century. And where did they learn it? Although they tell you, oh, it's the labor writings by, or labor rules by Abraham Lincoln. the founders of this country have been deeply affected by the Quran. They all read the Quran, the translations of the Quran. And they knew the ethics of war from the Ottomans. The Ottomans have huge wars in Europe, and they treated the prisoners in a very fair way. And they never destroyed cities. They never happened in the history of the Ottomans where they burned a city. They went into a city and burned. Never. So they learned the ethics of war from the conduct of Muslims throughout history, throughout the last 5 centuries. Again, this is another way to classify topics in fiqh: personal matters, personal hygiene, worship, marriage, inheritance, lineage. It's amazing that the entire Muslim world is in hot areas, and it was afflicted by epidemics, but not to the extent that ravaged Europe in the Middle Ages, where, you know, I mean, the plague and all of this were affected Europe in many times. It happened in the Muslim world, but not to the extent, because mainly Muslims have a hygienic, personal hygiene. We wash ourselves 5 times a day. And a friend of mine, he's a surgeon, he said, we used to wash our hands, and until now, surgeons, they wash their hands, first thing with water, and it has to go up to the elbow. They wash their faces. They cover their hair. And then they use alcohol and other disinfectants. They said, he told me, scientific study found that the additional alcohol, all of this is not as intensive as washing with water. Right, Danny? You're a doctor.
Yeah, we got to start
Okay.
with water for the soap to wash.
Yeah. So water is the most important thing. Just take all the dirt out. Economic matters, zakah. Usually, zakah is a must. People have to pay their zakah. And zakah is the minimum, absolute minimum. 2.5% is the absolute minimum a Muslim has to pay out of his wealth, not his income. Not his income, his wealth. Most American households in the US have 100,000 to millions of dollars. But the average is probably 100,000, 200,000. They have to pay 2.5% of that, not their income. When you are young, according to our scholars like Yusuf al-Qaradawi say, if you don't have assets, you pay on your income. If you don't have assets, you pay your income, because your education in the modern world is your asset. So whatever you get as income, and this is a minority view, but many modern scholars are starting to approve of this opinion. And particularly in the West, where people are broke. Their only asset is their education and whatever salary they get. So they say you pay on your salary, 2.5% on your salary. As you get richer, you start getting assets, and you buy stocks, and you buy properties and rental properties. Then you start paying on these assets. And the assets have different categories. And the average household in the US now is a few $100,000. So you're talking, zakah is at least several $1,000s, not a few $100s, what some people think. And this is the absolute minimum. You have to pay charity. Zakah is your duty towards society that Allah SWT has prescribed. Beyond that is your charity. These are things that our Islam has banned, usually gambling, monopoly, regulated tax laws, contracts. On the penal law, there is theft, trading in intoxicants or spreading it, adultery, murder. There's an interesting story between Ali ibn Abi Talib and Umar ibn Khattab, where a woman gave birth after 6 months, after she got married by 6 months. And Umar wanted to apply the penal law of adultery. He said she could not have a child after 6 months. Ali ibn Abi Talib told Amir al-Mu'mineen, he was the leader of the Muslims, he told, did you forget that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, حَمْلُ وَفِصَالُهُ ثَلَاثُونَ شَهْرًا? That, and there is an ayah, 2 years. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us after birth to nurse a baby for 2 years. But another ayah, that the birth, the conception, and the nursing the baby is 30 months, which means that pregnancy can end up after 6 months. So you cannot apply the penal law on that woman. So this is how Muslims were really understanding the legal system. Legal proceedings, again, Ali ibn Abi Talib has a falling with a person, and during he took him to the court. And actually that man had the shield. You know, weapons of war were very expensive. So Ali ibn Abi Talib lost his shield. And then he found it was another man. So he took him to court. He said, this is my shield. So Ali went to the judge, who was Shuraih. He's a very, very famous judge. So he told him, Amir al-Mu'mineen, you claim, means Prince of the Believer, you claim that this is your shield. What's your proof? He said, my son will testify this is my shield. So I cannot accept the testimony of your son. You have to bring other testimony. So, and then he ruled that he cannot get the shield. That person later, he was not a Muslim. He came and said, I found it on the battlefield because I was following the army, and it's not mine. And he gave it to Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib went to Shuraih, was a very good judge. He told him, you did not treat me equally with my opponent. You called me Amir al-Mu'mineen. You can, in court, you don't call me Prince of the Believers. You call me, it was my name. So this is how intricacies of the legal system in Islam. The law of treating Muslims with non-Muslims, I explained that Muslims could not interfere with the practice of non-Muslims, even things like drinking or eating pork and so on. Cannot interfere with that. You may stop it from being traded in the market, but you cannot interfere if they consume it. And we talked about the law of war and rights of POWs and so on. What are the Muslim sects? Throughout history, many sects appeared, but these are the main ones. There are many other sects that appeared. Some of them were within the fold of Islam, some of them were out of the fold of Islam. So there appeared the Sunni sects. There are 5 main schools. And then the Shia sects, there are basically several schools, and the Shia is basically a political sect. The difference between Shia and Sunni is purely political. And they appeared in the 2nd century. They appeared during the 1st century. Shia means the supporters of Ali ibn Abi Talib. When there was a difference between the Muslims and the supporters of Ali ibn Abi Talib called themselves Shia. But they did not appear as a separate sect until the 2nd century. The Khawarij appeared in the 1st century. They rebelled against Ali ibn Abi Talib, and they formed their own sect. And then there are many sects that originated from Shia sects in later centuries. Among them, the Ismailis, the Druze. The Ismailis, I don't need to go through the details of each one of these sects. The Druze, the Alawis. But basically, Ismailis are spread all over the world. Their leader is Agha Khan, if you heard about that. The Druze, they mainly in Lebanon and Syria and northern Israel. northern Palestine, I'm sorry. And then the Baha'is and the Qadianis. The Baha'is appeared in Iran, the Qadianis appeared in the subcontinent. And there are Sufism. Sufism is not really a sect. Many of the Sufis, they follow either Sunni sects or Shia sects. But in our time, they are identifying themselves very much as a sect. And many of the Sufis really they are Muslims, they are good Muslims, but some really have veered out of the fold of Islam, particularly in the West. A lot of Westerners are attracted to Sufism. They strip it of all the Islamic teachings and they just took only the spiritual part of it. So they are not really considered Muslims.
I have a question. Are these Miami and Jews, are they all considered out of that category, out of the fold of Islam?
No, they are really, the Ismailis, Druze, Alawis, Baha'i, and Qadiani are out of the fold of Islam, completely out of the fold of Islam. Completely out of the fold of Islam.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the major schools of fiqh. There is the Sunni schools, there is the teachings of Abu Hanifa, the Hanafi school, and they spread mainly in Iraq and Central Asia, and they spread after that to the Ottomans because most of the Ottomans came from Central Asia. So that's why the Hanafi school is spread in these areas. And then the Maliki school spread into Africa and North Africa and the Sahel and Western Africa and Sudan. And then you have the Shafi'i spread into Egypt, part of the Far East, Indonesia, and so on. And there is historical reason why. And then you have the Hanbali school, which is basically in Arabia. It's strong in Arabia. And from it came what's called the Wahhabis. There is no Wahhabi school. They are Hanbali. It's a way in the West really to belittle people. They are Hanbali. And there is the school of Ibn Hazm. It does not exist in our time at all. It was in Spain. And his fiqh, it's called the Zahiri fiqh, was very convenient for Muslims minority in a non-Muslim society. And many of the teachings of Ibn Hazm have been adopted by some people in the United States. Okay. And then on the Shia side, you have the Zaydi. The Zaydi are very close to the Sunnis. Many of the scholars of the Zaydi are being quoted by the Sunni scholars. So they are very, very close. And they are only in Yemen. Zaydis are only in Yemen. And when you go to Yemen, you cannot discriminate between a Zaydi and a Sunni. They are very close, very close. It's a small political difference. I don't need to go into that. And then you have among the majority of the Shias are Ja'fari, or some people call them Isna Ashar, the 12ers. And the difference is political. Basically, they take the rulings of the 12 Imams after the Prophet ﷺ. So started with Ali ibn Abi Talib, Al-Hasan, Al-Hussein, and then their descendants. So they consider them as their sayings are as sacred as the sayings of the prophets. So that's what distinct them from the Sunnis. And the Sunnis don't accept that. So, and then there is the Abadi. It's a sect that's in Eastern Arabia, in Oman, and part in North Africa, in Libya and Algeria. And there, you cannot discriminate between these sects at all, except the Ja'fari, because of political differences. This is a picture of, I'm finished with the presentation. I want to show you this is Azhar Mosque. It has the Azhar University. It's the biggest Islamic institution in the world. And they have, it's not in Cairo only. In Egypt, Al-Azhar schools are all over Egypt. and they have branches in Africa. They have branches in the Far East, they don't like Indonesia and Malaysia. And that's why they follow the Shafi'i mazhab. These faraway countries, they follow Shafi'i mazhab that was followed in Egypt. And the next, I'm going to show you some maps. So this is where the different schools of thoughts have spread. The Hanafi is the dark, you see it's all in Central Africa, in Turkey, and part of Syria and Palestine. See here? So all of these areas, they are Hanafi. And here and here, and part of Egypt. Now these are the Hanbalis, mainly in Arabia. These are the Abadis. Here's the Abad, and few people here in North Africa. As the Maliki, they spread all over Africa and North Africa. And the Shafi'i are the blue. And it's funny that you find them here in Eastern Africa, in Egypt, most of the eastern part of Africa, and then you have them in Indonesia. When I went to Jakarta many years ago, I found there is a center for Al-Azhar. So there was a lot of Azhar scholars that were sent to Indonesia because they are Shafi'i. And Azhar is mainly Shafi'i. And the other schools of thoughts, you'll find, for example, the Ja'fari are mainly in Iran and Afghanistan. The Zaydi are in Yemen. Zaydi are only in Yemen. You don't find them anywhere else. Which countries are applying Sharia? Almost nobody. They have the dark green. They say they are applying Sharia on the state level, but this is probably misleading. There is nobody that's applying Sharia today. Nobody, absolutely. So you may apply it. People may apply it on family law, or some regional areas. You find probably a country like Malaysia, they are more serious about Islam. And the reason you find these remote areas is that basically they are not seen as a threat by the West. I'm sorry for saying this. But all of these countries, they have been colonized, and the West doesn't want them to apply Islam. They look at any application of Islam as political Islam taking over, and they're going to be against the West and so on. But these remote areas, they went under the radar, basically. And also, Malaysia is very prosperous. Islam prospers when there is no poverty, when people are treated with dignity. The Malay people are extremely courteous people. And Indonesia also. It's the same culture, the Malay culture, basically, Indonesian. So that you find them, they prosper. Like Islam is prospering in the West, whether it's Europe or in America. Whenever there is freedom and there is dignity, Islam prospers. So that's I'm going to stop here. So, and that concludes our series of Islam 101. I don't know what we're going to follow. Brother Amin has suggestions, so you can tell us what you have in mind.
We'll probably go freestyle.
Okay. Okay. I want to thank you and your family, Sister Akimol. You've been always here, the first people, and preparing the scene and putting the material and so on. Jazakumullah khair. And recording it. Jazakumullah khair.
We thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Any comments or questions? Shall I test you? Okay, we covered many topics, so what are the 5 pillars of Islam? Anybody can answer. Yes, I'll give you verbal certification. What are the 5 pillars of Islam? Sister Sylvia.
One is believing in Muhammad,
Yes.
one God.
The Shahada. Yeah. Okay. What else? Danny. Okay, the Hajj. What else? What else? Praying 5 times, exactly. What? Zakat. What else? Fasting. Jazakumullah khair. And and then we talked about little briefly on the life of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So just ask you a few things. When did the Prophet get the revelation? At what age? 40. Jazakumullah khair. And how long he spent in Mecca before immigrating to Medina? How many years? 13 years. 13 years. And how many years he spent in Medina?
10 years.
How many?
10 years.
10 years. 10 years and fraction. Yes. Yes. Jazakumullah khair. And who are the righteously guided Khalif? How many of them? Who came after him? Mahmoud? 4. Okay. What are their names? Who was the first one? Abu Bakr. Who was the second one? Omar. Okay. And the third one? No. Ali was the fourth. Who was the third? Osman. This is a very detailed question. I don't think whether you remember. Who was the 5th righteous guided Khalif? Not mentioned too much in history. He was one. People consider one of the righteous guided Khalif, but there was one came after Ali ibn Abi Talib. Who? No, Al-Khattab was the second. That came who came right after Ali ibn Abi Talib, after he was assassinated? His son, Al-Hassan. And the Prophet ﷺ praised him so much because after Muslims had differences between the supporters of Ali and supporters of Muawiyah, he reconciled. He said, if I abdicate and we reconcile the two groups, I will abdicate. And he abdicated 6 months after taking charge of the Khilafah. Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein were born around the first few years of Hijrah. So he was probably around 39, 38 when he abdicated. So Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was the 5th. And I wanted to go back to some of the history here. Islam prospered until 249. After that, problems started happening. And this is what most historians say that, remember, I want to show you one of the slides here. Look at the last of the great Imams, 241. Around that time, the Khulafa became weak. The Abbasi Khilafah became weak and took over by what's called the Sultan, where basically the political system that Muslims had, where the Khalifa really ruled and dominated from China to North Africa, weakened because the Khulafa were not as strong. And who took over? The Salatin. And the Salatin all came from military. They were military generals. So when you hear Sultan, it means throughout Islamic history, it's a person who who gives loyalty to the Khalifa, but the Khalifa started having less and less and less power. So basically, where the civil, many people say because the takeover of the military, the Islamic civilization weakened. Weakened on the political level. And Islam is not just political, but on the political level it weakened. And all of the civilizations prospered, and advances in science and literature and all of everything prospered. However, the political system weakened. And it culminated into the fall of Baghdad almost 400 years later. Shall I ask you more questions, or shall we conclude? Are you tired? Okay, who are the great imams? It's in front of you. Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik ibn Anas, al-Shafi'i, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Okay. Abu Hanifa is not of Arab origin. Imam Malik was raised in Medina. Imam Shafi'i was raised in Mecca. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was raised in Iraq. And they came in this order. And they all respected each other very much. And because they got their reputations that they always stood up against the injustice. So scholars get their reputation when they stand up, not only based on scholarly knowledge. So all of them got imprisoned, and many of them suffered a lot from the political system. Ahmad bin Hanbal lived under three khulafa, three leaders of Islam that persecuted him. Al-Ma'mun, then Al-Mu'tasim, then Al-Mutawakkil. Al-Mutawakkil released him eventually from prison. So, but he suffered at their hands. Same thing with Imam Shafi'i. Imam Malik. But Imam Malik was very strong because he was from Medina. So, and his strength also came from his physique. He was very tall. So always gave people, he dominated. There is a funny story I want to share with you. Imam Shafi'i was contemporary to Imam Malik, and he was raised in Mecca. So he asked the governor of Mecca to give him recommendations. He wanted to go study under Imam Malik. So he took a recommendation from the governor of Mecca, directed to the governor of Medina. So Imam Shafi'i, the first thing he went to Medina, he went to the governors. And then he told them, I have a recommendation. I want you to ask Imam Malik to accept me as a student. So Imam Shafi'i describes the situation of the governor of Medina. He said, I found him trembling. He told him, exactly, if you ask me to move a mountain, it's easier for me to ask him than ask Imam Malik. He was very strong personality. And actually, the governor took Imam Shafi'i, went to the house of Imam Malik, and he told him, I have a recommendation for you, for Shafi'i to become your student. And he gave him the letter, and Imam Shafi'i threw it on the floor. He said, knowledge is not by recommendation. You have to earn it. And Imam Shafi'i said, I looked behind me, I thought the governor ran out of the house. Not to hear the chastisement of Imam Malik. And Imam Shafi'i, of course, he was strong also. So he told him, Sheikh, I memorized your book. He memorized the book of fiqh of Imam Malik, called the Muwatta. And Imam Malik asked him a few questions. He told him, you are smart. Come back tomorrow. So I accepted him as a student. These are some of the funny stories you hear about these people.
I posted on our group, someone on Omar Salimyan has a series on the four.
On the four imams. Okay, that's great.
So
Yeah.
it's